The X-Zone radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone radio and TV show or in any manner endorsed by Rob McConnell, REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, Talkstar Radio Network, its affiliated stations, or employees.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
You're so hypnotizing. Could you be the devil? Could you be an angel? Your touch magnetizing. Feels like I am floating. Leaves my body glowing. They say, be afraid. You're not like the others. Futuristic lovers. Different DNA. They don't understand you. You're from a whole other world. A different dimension. You open my eyes, and I'm ready to go. Lead me into the light. Kiss me, infect me with your love and fill me with your poison. Take me, take me. Wanna be a victim, ready for a puncher.
And welcome back, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. We're coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide toll-free, 1-800-610-7035. Email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. A couple of things before we get to my special guest this hour, a good friend, Philip Coppens. We do have now the X-Zone 2012 site that is open. We are posting all the newspaper articles that we can find from around the world at www.xzone2012.com. Plus, we have a new UFO reporting site up at www.xzonenews.com. Starting in March, the X-Zone radio show and X-Zone TV show will be broadcast live on Working Star Network. We will be broadcasting simulcast radio and television starting in March. We're totally excited about that, especially when we'll be giving you firsthand reports from our investigation trip down to South America. We're taking 10 days. We're going down to South America. We're going to be checking out not only Mexico, but surrounding countries to see what they know or what their legends or what their folklore or their history talk and tell about December the 21st, 2012. My guest this hour, Exonation, as I said, is Philip Coppens, and we've had the pleasure of having Philip on the show a number of times. It's always great talking to him. He's an author, investigative journalist, ranging the world of politics to ancient history and mystery. Now, he co-hosts the Spirit Revolution radio show with his wife, Kathleen McGowan, and is a frequent contributor to NEXUS magazine, a great magazine, I might add at that, and Atlas Rising magazine, another super magazine. Since 1995, he has lectured extensively and has appeared in a number of television and DVD documentaries, including Ancient Aliens, a series, and that's on the History Channel. He is the author of The Stone Puzzle of Rosslyn Chapel, The Canopus Revelation, and Land of the Gods, The New Pyramid Age, Servants of the Grail, the ebook 2012, Science or Fiction, Killing Kennedy, and The Ancient Alien Question. And Philip's website is www.philipcoppens.com. That's PHILIPCOPPENS.com. And Philip, welcome back to the X-Zone.
Thanks for having me on, Rob.
It's always great talking to you. 2012 is a big topic these days. Philip, what is your take on December the 21st, 2012? Is it the end of the world?
It is not the end of the world, but it's definitely an interesting day. It's obviously a day which has been singled out by the ancient Mayans, and I'm very glad to see that actually portions of the Mexican government are coming to terms with this reality. For a very long period of time, it was as if this was just something which was going to live within the Mayan heartland and, the New Age community. But it really is nice to see that Mexican, Guatemalan governments are beginning to endorse the Mayan people. And, my viewpoint is precisely that of the Mayans. It was, it's the long count calendar. It began in 3114, and it got divided into subdivisions of roughly 500 years. At each of these points in time, various rituals were performed, quite often in Chichen Itza, and it is the expectation that these same rituals are going to be done by Mayan people, hopefully in Chichen Itza or elsewhere. And at each moment in time, and this I think is really something which is very different from what the Mayans believe and what we in the Western world have made the 2012 phenomena into, because the Mayans really believe that at these moments in time, the gods make contact with them and they take stock of the preceding era and then decide together with mankind what should really be the focus for the future. And it is said that we live in the fourth sun, which started in 3114 BC, and that all of this 5,000 years of which we have been living in was specifically to do with
all right, Philip,
spirituality.
I hate to do this. We've got to take a 2-minute commercial break. We'll be right back. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Philip and I return.
Bring the wind to carry me over, lead me home to my town. Tell me when that breeze is blowing, taking me home to my town. When I think of you, Scotia, there's a love that just bleeds in my heart. In my childhood days, we went our different ways, but you knew that we'd never part. Now I'm all alone.
Welcome back to the X Zone. Of course, that's Glass Tiger with My Town. Every time I hear that, I think of my friend Sam Reed, who is the keyboardist of Glass Tiger. Speaking about friends, Philip Coppens is with us this hour, www.philipcoppens.com. And you and I were talking about December the 25th, 2012, before we went to the break. And it seems that the Mayan people are finally regaining the notice for the great accomplishments that were stifled, taken away from them for so long, Philip.
Absolutely, they are, quickly regaining control. When we're looking at the 1980s, the Mayan people were slaughtered.
Yes.
200,000 people were killed in Central America, basically through NAFTA agreements, which the United States government basically signed off on and allowed the extremist regimes of Central America to basically commit genocide. And it's something which has really been ill-reported in the Western media, obviously because of the fact that the West was very much involved. Since that period of time, however, the Mayans really have become more and more prominent. A Mayan leader, a woman at that, actually finished third in the Guatemalan presidential elections, I think roughly 12 to 18 months ago. And simply the fact that a Mayan person finished third is something which a few years ago would have simply been impossible. Things like radio stations, which were at one point created to basically put propaganda out to destroy the Mayans and their belief systems, have now been overturned and have become radio stations which are airing the Mayan point of view. So much is happening, and there are people who are actually speaking of a Mayan renaissance, and this is something which is, I think, extraordinary to see, and it is really against this backdrop that I think we need to begin to look at the 2012 phenomena. For a very long period of time, people in the West have been using the 2012 phenomenon as if there is not a single descendant of the Mayans alive, and there are hundreds of thousands of them living specifically in parts of Mexico or Guatemala and various other Central American countries. And now they are finally beginning to get a voice, and I hope that when it comes to December 21st, 2012, which is 11 months away, that really we are in a situation whereby we are, looking at events happening within the Mayan heartland, whereby the Mayans are featured centrally. And when that happens, there will be no messages of doom and gloom, but it will be, I think, quite a spiritual and quite an interesting experience.
Over the many years doing this show, we've talked a lot of times about extraterrestrials, aliens, and here it is 20 years later, and I was going through my guest list the other night, and you know what, Philip? Nothing has changed in 20 years when it comes to the extraterrestrial question.
I think that might be perceived as such, and to some extent, you're right. The things which have changed are this. I think that right now, with the popularity of the Ancient Alien, television series on the History Channel, right now I'm taping together with so many other people season 4. It is the History Channel's most highly watched and most highly rated show. It is to some extent a sensation, because at the end of each episode worldwide, approximately 100 million people will have watched an episode of Ancient Aliens.
But no disrespect meant to you or the great people at History Channel, because over the years I've worked with them as well. But if all these people are watching, and this is season 4, how come nobody has come forward yet, Philip, with that all-conclusive proof that aliens are real and just not a figment of the imagination as gods of the old, because people needed something to relate to in the world that they existed in? How do we know that they're real? Here we are all these years later, no proof.
Well, I mean, this is an issue which I address in my book, The Ancient Alien Question, and I show that in the last 20 years, the proponents of ancient alien visitation have progressed it to a point that it now really needs to be a cooperative effort with science, because some of these things, for example, the dropper.
Yeah.
The dropper is the story of how in Tibet a spaceship might have crashed thousands of years ago, and the descendants might still be out there. They might have interbred with the local population. Well, we know right now that there is a tribe who claims to be descendants of these people. They're still in existence. And basically the situation is this, that an individual like me or you, without government credentials, without access to DNA testing, simply cannot go to China and say, hey, can we get a bit of your DNA for testing? And it's just one example of at least 5 really promising cases which are very close to proof that we have not been alone. But in each of these cases, it needs the active participation and cooperation of science. And basically, scientists are saying, we know for a fact that there is nothing to this, so there is no need to explore this any further. And there is one specific chapter in my book which I think kind of like highlights this more than anything. And it's not necessarily to do with ancient aliens as such, but with the question, where did life on Earth come from? Was it this primordial soup, as scientists are saying, or was life coming from elsewhere in the universe, and did it ride on a comet or a meteorite and then crash? This idea of panspermia, which so many scientists are proposing themselves. Well, the situation right now, at this very moment in time, is that astrobiologists at NASA are refused publication in peer-reviewed journals when they are finding evidence, proof of the fact that life could not have originated on planet Earth, that life originated elsewhere in the universe. And so what you have is the NASA really having to do science by press release. What NASA scientists are doing is saying, we have studied this, we have concluded this. Various other scientists are in absolute agreement in this, but we cannot publish this in journals of astrobiology because the editors-in-chief there are absolutely refusing to look into this subject matter. People like Chandra Wickramasinghe, who is one of the leaders in this field, has called this a conspiracy of silence, and he's been saying that this conspiracy of silence has been in place since roughly 1982, 1984. And so this is precisely 20, 30 years whereby science as an institution, academics specifically as an institution, are simply not interested. For them, it doesn't exist. They want to make it go away, and they ridicule it. And this is why the elusive proof is really still escaping people. But at the same time, it is clear that people, and I think this is kind of like the evidence of Ancient Aliens, a TV series. It is that people are becoming aware of this. It is the fact that after being lied to by politicians and being led down a dire path by the financial industry, people are waking up to the fact that science quite often is about dogma and not so much about exploration anymore. And so what I think we're going to see in the next 5 to 10, if not 15 years, is this idea that definitely, there are certain things wrong with science, and that we're hopefully going to push science into saying, well, we don't care that you're not interested in this. We pay you taxes. We pay your bills. You really need to start looking into
All right,
this.
let me ask you the question then, Philip. If this information is real and that the pseudoscientists are actually on track, what does the established scientific community have to fear from this truth coming out?
It's because it is a paradigm upsetting idea. Everything, science at this moment in time fears everything which changes the paradigm. And ancient Egypt is the best example, and I will illustrate it with 2 examples.
Sure.
One of them is that in the 1980s, the Great Pyramid and the Second Pyramid were subjected to carbon dating. Those carbon dating results showed, that the Second Pyramid was older than the Great Pyramid, and that both of them were roughly 500 years older than their current dating. Since the 1980s, this scientific report, which isn't controversial at all, nobody contests the conclusions, has not been published in a peer-reviewed journal. As a result of this, thousands of Egyptologists worldwide have not had to consider this piece of evidence, and for the last 20 to 30 years they have continued to pretend that this doesn't exist. And according to the scientific rules of the game which they adhere to, they don't have to, because hey, guess what? It's not published anywhere. And so nothing has progressed. We know that these pyramids are at least 500 years older, yet everybody is pretending within the scientific community as if it's not. And the duplicity or the two-facedness of science, I think, comes to the front in the following example as well, which is that there is king lists. The 30 dynasties of ancient Egypt come from the king list of Manetho. This begins in roughly 3000, or rather the list of pharaohs begins in 3000 BC. And Egyptologists adhere to this religiously. They say this is correct. This is really the entire chronology of Egypt, which has been based on this. Well, Manetho himself puts a period of 25,000 years before that. And he says that in origin, Egypt was ruled by the gods like Isis, Osiris, and various other beings, that for a period of time, roughly 6,000 years, there was a rule of the followers of Horus, kind of demigods, and that afterwards it was the rule of the pharaohs. So when you go to a scientist and you say, well, you swear by this king list that, the king list of the pharaohs is completely accurate, so what is your opinion about what else Manetho is saying, specifically that the gods once ruled ancient Egypt, and this 25,000 years ago? They say, well, clearly Manetho invented this, because we all know that there are no gods, and we all know that there are no followers of Horus. And it's something which we let them get away with, and they get away with because they really are in charge of the game. If we are to enter this kind of reasoning in a court of law, they couldn't use this. Manetho's king list would be identified as a piece of evidence, and they would have to argue every bit of evidence, every part of it. And so this kind of like, well, this is nonsense, but this is absolutely true, they get away with time and time again. And I think, largely to shows like Ancient Aliens and so much out there, else which is out there, I'm beginning to hope that people are growing up to this and are shortly not going to get away.
All right, stand by, Philip. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Philip Coppens is our guest this hour, Exxon Nation. www.philipcoppens.com. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. You can always send an email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. The X-Zone, a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 6 a.m. Eastern, right here on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone Broadcast Network, and our affiliates worldwide.
Winding your way down on Baker Street, lighting your head and day.
Welcome back, everyone. Philip Coppens is our guest this hour, www.philipcoppens.com. Philip, I've got a question for you, my friend. We were talking about how science refuses to accept certain things because of the shift of the paradigm that it would create. When we look at the different religions of the world, that certainly poses a conundrum to the scientific community, and yet they've allowed the controversy between science and religion to continue. They say, oh, sure, it's possible that the ancient gods in the Bible were extraterrestrials, and who knows? But they don't seem to mind the religious argument. But as you and I well know, when it comes to extraterrestrials, that's where they draw the line. What's the difference?
Well, religions are, very interesting when it comes to the subject of extraterrestrials. The Vatican, for one, has got a chief astronomer who basically says, that he is open to the idea of extraterrestrial life. And the question seems to be whether Jesus died on the cross for the salvation of original sin, not just on planet Earth, but across the galaxy.
Yes.
That's kind of like the Vatican take on it. When it comes to science and religion, they have a very weird relationship at this moment in time. The Turin Shroud is, I think, one example whereby the Vatican basically seems to endorse bad science to kind of like try and explain some of, the things like the Turin Shroud away. At other moments in time, scientists will say that basically they have no or nothing to do with religion. Now, the ancient alien question does touch upon the what I would call the legends, the folkloric material, and sometimes that sits within religion. In the case of the Bible, when legends and stories like this are written down, and they become incorporated into a religious text where people try to get morality from or a religious doctrine from, the two overlap. But there's also things like material from Greek mythology, whereby really at this moment in time there is no active Greek religion, so there's really nobody touching upon it. But at all times, science is really saying that they don't have to look at the ancient alien question for a variety of reasons. The most bombastic approach is really that they know. They know, and they have known for decades, that there is no truth to this whatsoever. And this is a very grandiose statement which they like to make, not just about the ancient alien question, but about so many other things. On things like the near-death experience, they actually say that it's a hands-off policy. They feel that life after death is not something which science should look at. They feel that this is just a bailiwick of religion. And I completely disagree with this because, science should be about the exploration. If there is life after death, that's not a bailiwick of religion. That is not a bailiwick of belief as such, if we can prove it. And there are various doctors across the world who are doing medical experiments and other experiments which show that at the moment of death something weird happens, that there is a part of us which survives and is able to go out of our bodies and see certain things which are happening in an operating room, which we would never be able to see if we were inside our body. And all of these things really sketch a very complex, sometimes standoff, sometimes harmonious way through science and religion. And the ancient alien question really is kind of like on that threshold. Sometimes it sits firmly within the borders of science, and sometimes it sits within the borders of religion. And at all times, it really is that very few people dare to go there. Since I wrote the book appeared in November 15, but it was finished in late May. And in between, there is actually one professor, Paul Davis from Arizona State University, who does stand out, who is a person who wants to change the paradigm on so many things, because he is, to some extent, a very liberal scientist. And he is actually proposing that we should start looking into something which he calls astroforensics, this idea that we have been visited by extraterrestrial beings in the past. Now, he is saying that basically, life has been here for 4.5 billion years, and that 800 million years ago, somebody might have come here, and that we have no evidence for this. He says that he feels that the best evidence for visitors from outer space has happened before mankind appeared on the scene. And it is my contention that the best evidence for visitation is actually since mankind has come on the scene. And this was also an opinion shared by the likes of the late Carl Sagan and various others. But, the good thing is that after Carl Sagan died more than a decade ago now, almost 20 years ago, actually, there is finally somebody else out there from within the scientific community who is trying to get this debatable, and the future will tell how successful he is. Right now, the only success he's had is that he's been able to publish this report within a journal he is the editor of himself, and we will see whether over the next few months or years some of his colleagues are going to take him up on the invitation, or whether they are going to pretend that it never happened.
Now, you also say that that many proponents of the alien theory claim gods and aliens, that the gods are aliens and that there is no God. How does this fit in with the religious side of the debate?
Well, I think what happened was this. The ancient alien subject became extremely popular at the beginning of the 1970s.
Sure, Eric von Däniken was a big one.
Absolutely. And it was an approach which was taken, which was this. The Bible is literal, but it's not about God, it's about extraterrestrial beings. And so it was this weird, the fundamentalists are right, but they have got it wrong at the same time. And I don't think that's the approach to take. The existence of God with a big G is independent of the existence of gods with small g's. And actually, when you start to dig into very detailed material, specifically ancient Egypt and some other big civilizations, including the Mayans, what you're beginning to see is that these beings were declared to be gods because they were superhuman, because they were somehow seen as the assistant or the initiator into God with the big G. They told us about God with the big G. And it is really, I think, a sign of the times of the early 1970s that it was interpreted in a very materialistic way. I think we should get away from that. There is space enough, and the evidence suggests as such as well, for gods with a small g and God with big G to coexist.
All right, taking into consideration the the amount of work that is being done into the ancient aspect of extraterrestrials, and the search for the proof and the search for the truth. How much investigation, true investigation, is actually being done to prove the present existence of extraterrestrials?
Well, from a kind of government perspective, specifically NASA, actually quite a lot and yet so little. For a very long period of time, the search for ET happened through SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligences through radio telescopes and various forms of radio astronomy. And basically it was trying to find a needle in a haystack, and everybody always knew this. But it was somehow felt to be the only approach possible. And, we have seen movies like Contact. We have seen headlines as in the fact that NASA is scaling down on this. And to some extent, people are saying that this is a sad thing. But really, this approach has not been fruitful. Instead, what NASA has done is they have changed tack. Everything which NASA is doing today is new. So they have pushed out the Kepler Space Telescope there, and it was, it's 11 months, coming up to 12 months since it was pushed out. And already it has gotten back extraordinary research data. It has identified 72 potential planets out there which might be home to Earth-like environments, and the headlines come in on an almost monthly basis, suggesting that we are soon going to be able to find a twin planet to Earth somewhere out there. Popular Science, in its October issue, went with a headline which was basically an index of where NASA and also the Russians and various other nations are in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence through these new means. And basically, everybody is convinced of two things. One, life is a cosmic imperative in the sense that the universe is created or seeded or prepared for life to be pretty much everywhere throughout the universe. And as a result of that, the scientists are convinced that they are going to find proof of this extraterrestrial life somewhere in the universe within the next 10 to 15, 20 years at most. And judging from the speed at which they're going about doing these things right now, I would actually say that it might be less than 10 years.
But are they sure? Are the scientists sure they're actually looking for the right type of life? How do we know that life on other planets is carbon-based? We're looking for carbon-based, but what if life on other planets are not carbon-based units? We could be missing the boat completely.
Well, I mean, the big change here from within NASA is that they have identified that what they should be looking for is DNA-based life. Basically, they have done experiments within interstellar space recreated in laboratories. The likes of Lou Alamandolo have basically shown that if you do this, interstellar space will create the building blocks of DNA. The only thing it then takes is a piece of rock and it'll transport itself throughout the galaxy. And this is really something which NASA has been focusing on for the last 10 years. And so DNA to them is the key to everything.
But what happens, Philip? What happens once again? Like, we don't know everything. To think that our scientists are the know-it-all and above all of everything is very ludicrous in my opinion. They're humans. How do we know that they're even on the right track?
Well, because at this moment in time, with the DNA approach of which astrobiology is taking, really so much is being discovered at this moment in time about the origins of life on our own planet, about the fact that DNA appears everywhere in the universe spontaneously. Now, does that mean that DNA is going to be the only kind of life out there in the universe? That's a big question mark, and that might be a century, if not 1,000 years from now, before we are going to able to be answering this question. But right now, it's all about finding life out there, and it's about getting the best chances. And the best approach of finding life out there is by the approach which they're taking right now, which is looking for DNA-based life, which means looking for environments where DNA can thrive. And that is basically where the Kepler telescopes comes in. But again, it's an all-encompassing approach.
But isn't DNA, up until now, only believed to exist in carbon-based units?
Absolutely.
So once again, I go back to my argument. What happens if life elsewhere in the universe is silicone-based? We'll miss it.
At that moment in time, well, I mean, this is the thing. Could there be silicone-based life out there in the universe? The answer is yes. Everything is possible. But right now, what they have focused on is basically the notion that DNA, is going to exist throughout the galaxy, because interstellar space, which is pretty much everything in the galaxy out there, is made up out of, DNA. And so for life to be found elsewhere in the universe, the biggest chances of that being found out is through, looking for the conditions through where DNA-based life is going to be at. At the same time, what is also happening is that there's a radical reinterpretation of Mars material. Even the people like Gilbert Levin, who in 1976 said that the Viking space probe, didn't identify evidence of life on Mars. He has now actually said that he has revisited this data from 1976, and he is now quite convinced that actually he was wrong by saying that there was no life on Mars. And so all of a sudden, Mars as another harbor of water, another harbor of life is once again coming into the scope of NASA. And, again, NASA, even though NASA obviously is filled with scientists, they are working in a completely different atmosphere from so much elsewhere of science. And I think, as much dislike we quite often heap upon NASA or the governments, what is really happening with NASA at this moment in time is really interesting and really progressive.
But once again, all I'm saying, Philip, is that we may be looking totally in the wrong direction, because what we're doing is we're basing everything that we're looking for in the universe on what we know. We're looking at DNA. We're looking for DNA that matches our DNA. This is where SETI went wrong, because they're looking for signals that we recognize. They weren't looking for signals that were not recognizable.
And I think, the thing is right now that I think the difference between the SETI search is this. With SETI, we had no idea what we were looking for. We thought we knew that we were looking for certain things, but in retrospect, we had no idea to distinguish a pulsar signal from an intelligent life signal. And there were a number of occasions whereby the two, were mistaken for each other, and they didn't go anywhere. Right now, what we know is that we know where to look for signs of DNA. And if we find signs of DNA elsewhere, if we find
all right,
conditions,
Philip, we've got to take a
them.
commercial break, but like I was saying, we may be wrong, because what we're looking for is something that we believe is out there. It may not be out there. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as the X Zone continues, right here from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Philip Coppens is our guest. www.philipcoppens.com.
Walk like an Egyptian. I'm sick of being alone. When are you coming home? Just a glimpse of your face. I can remember smelling your hair. I'll meet you anywhere. Somewhere that no one can retrace. Somewhere where no one will know our faces. She has two arms to hold me and four legs to wrap around me. She's not your typical girlfriend. She's my alien. She's my alien. She knows when something is wrong, when something doesn't belong. She can read in my mind, and she can be assured that with me.
Philip Coppens is our special guest, and Philip, it's always such a great pleasure talking to you. Philip's website is www.philipcoppens.com. Now, Philip, your research has actually uncovered an extraterrestrial connection in the form of direct archaeological evidence to the 2012 phenomenon.
Well, yes. I mean, because basically what happens in 2012 is this. The only thing which we know from an archaeological point of view is that there are two inscriptions, Tortuguero and a recent one which was revealed in October, a brick from another complex in the Mayan heartland, which basically says that on December 21st, 2012, the Bolon Yuktute, the so-called nine gods, will return. And clearly, this is something which, when you start looking at the anthropological evidence of the Mayans, it's something that they were absolutely convinced of. There are even records, for example, that in 1615 or 1620, that period when a cycle of time ended for the Mayans, they basically went to the headquarters of the Spanish conquistadors in Merida and said that they were going to do ceremonies in Chichen Itza to make contact with these nine gods. And so whether this is a physical return of an extraterrestrial deity, or whether it is more what I would call a spiritual contact with a deity, to some extent that is secondary. What the Mayans are absolutely convinced about is that 2012 is all about making contact with these non-human intelligences.
Hypothetically, December 21st, 2012 comes and goes. December 23rd, 2012 comes and goes. Nothing changes. What happens? What happens to those people within the pseudosciences who have been talking about the changes that the galactic alignment are going to bring, the return of the gods, as talked about by the Mayans? How much of a damage, and what kind of damage control will there be needed before anybody takes ufology or any pseudoscience seriously in the future?
Well, to a large extent, it's not that bad. The industry of YK2 recovered very quickly from the non-existence of the YK2 book. But I think the central message is this: we are focusing way too much on December 21st as such. The Mayans themselves have always said that the period 20 years before and 20 years after are very interesting times to live in. And let's go back to the world of 1993 and see
All right,
how
Philip,
much has changed.
we've got 30 seconds.
So, look at the world of 1993 and see how much has changed. And I think, the prophecy of the Mayans that we live in interesting times are absolutely true. We have become a global village. And I think that is really the message of 2012. We are a global village.
Whoa. That kind of came on loud. Philip, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Always a great pleasure. We'll have to have you back on in the near future to continue this very interesting conversation. Exonation, Philip Coppens has been my guest this hour. www.philipcoppens.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the hour as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from where? Right here, our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I'll be back on the other side. Don't go away.